Hey everybody, I'm Matt. Thanks for hanging out with me on my YouTube channel. This is the Cathedral Church of St. Luke in Orlando, Florida. It's beautiful. It's a cathedral, so it's the head of a diocese or a bunch of churches in a region of the Episcopal Church. In addition to this church just being stunning in every way, there is one thing that I wanted to point out, and it's these shields right here that are at the top of each of these columns. Each one of these shields corresponds to one of the disciples, and each one of these symbols on here tells a little story about their lives and what tradition says they even might have done after the Bible.
So we're going to look at all of them, and also I probably need to be a little bit quieter. I think somebody's coming in here. But let's start with the most famous one right over here, which symbolizes St. Peter. The keys are a nod to Matthew 16 when Peter rightly identifies Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of God, and then Jesus affirms that and says, I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And in Catholic art, you'll almost always see Peter portrayed as holding those keys. It's a sign of the authority of God resting upon the church. But this is an Episcopal church, not Catholic, so it's interesting that that imagery makes its way through to here. And then the upside down cross is just a nod to the church tradition that Peter was crucified upside down by the Emperor Nero on the site that is now occupied by St. Peter's Basilica. This next one is representative of Bartholomew, who I think is also Nathaniel in the Bible, and he is said to have gone and evangelized what was left of the old Persian Empire way out east, and he's symbolized by these three knives because according to tradition he was flayed alive. But in the ancient Christian tradition of flipping those gruesome martyrdoms on their head and making them a symbol of God's glory, he's often portrayed as resurrected and holding his body's own skin. This is St. Andrew's cross. A lot of people know this one. It's associated with Scotland, but Andrew, the older brother of Peter, never made it to Scotland. He did his work after Jesus around the Black Sea and was martyred on a cross of this shape, according to tradition, in Greece. Matthias is the disciple who was chosen to replace Judas after he died, and there's a ton of competing tradition about how Matthias was martyred. One of those says he was stoned and then beheaded with an axe in Jerusalem, thus the Bible and the axe. It looks like a couple of these shields are tucked away back up there in the balcony. I'm gonna sneak up there and see if we can get a better look. This is the symbol of Simon the Zealot, and I've never seen it presented quite like this before, but that's a fish resting on the part of the Bible that opens with the spine on the bottom oriented downward. And I think the idea here is that he was a fisherman and then he became a fisher of men. A lot of times you'll see Philip symbolized with a cross like this or one on its side, but pretty much always for Philip you'll see some sort of acknowledgement of two loaves. That's what these little circles with the crosses in them are supposed to be, because he participated in the feeding of the 5,000. There's a strong tradition with Thomas that he made it all the way to India and maybe even further east, where he's said to have built a church with his own hands, thus the carpenter's square here, and where he is said to have been martyred by being run through, thus the image of the spear. The boat symbolizes St. Jude or Thaddeus, it's the same guy, because he was said to have sailed into many ports, telling about Jesus before he was martyred violently as well. St. James the Less, also known as James the Just, not to be confused with James the Great, who is the brother of John. St. James the Less is symbolized by this saw because of a tradition that says he was martyred by being sawn in half. The three money bags are for Levi, also known as Matthew, who wrote the first gospel, because he was a tax collector for the occupying Romans until he met Jesus and gave all of that up to follow him. John, the beloved disciple, who also wrote the Gospel of John and the New Testament letters of John and the book of Revelation, he's symbolized by this serpent in a chalice because there's a tradition that says he was offered a poison cup in an attempt on his life, but he survived it, and John is the only one here who lived all the way to old age and definitely was not martyred. The scallop shell is the symbol of St. James the Great, who was the first disciple to be martyred. In pre-Christian times, the Romans associated the scallop with the idea of a religious pilgrimage, and there's a huge religious pilgrimage trail in Spain dedicated to St. James that includes all kind of imagery surrounding a scallop as well. The origin of that story is debated. There's a legend about a guy who was going to get married, and to show his love to his wife, he threw himself into the sea and got overwhelmed by the waves and then was delivered alive, protected by scallops. There's another story that says St. James relics were washed up on the shores of Spain or somewhere around there, covered in scallops as well. It's unclear exactly how the scallop came to be associated with St. James the Great, but it's one of the strongest, most well-known associations of any of these symbols with any of these disciples.
I think it's wild to note that how many of these? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these 12 shields depict a violent instrument, which is used in the violent death of these men who were faithful witnesses for Christ. Only one of these guys is believed to have lived out all the way to old age, that being St. John. They paid a real price to pass along the message of Christ, to obey Christ's command to do that. And, well, it worked, because this building is still here, I'm still here, and you're still here watching this video. Pretty amazing.